This video is designed to demonstrate to users how to use load testing with API Fortress. So the first important thing to note is that load testing with API Fortress is only available for our on-premises customers. So let's go ahead and jump in. So from here, we can actually see the project view, which is kind of the standard view that most of our users are working with most of the time. In order to access load testing, we go to Tools and then click Load Testing. And then from here, our next logical step, if we don't have any tasks created, which obviously here we do, would be to create a new task. So we'll go ahead and click New Task, and we'll give it a name. So in this case, we'll call it Demonstration Task, and then we'll select a project. And what we're doing here is we're selecting a project to select a test from. Now what will populate in here are the projects that we have in API Fortress already, our collections of tests. So in this case, I'm going to select the one that says Demo API. And in doing that, I'll have access to all of the tests that are in that project. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be running one of those tests effectively in bulk. So in this case, I'll select Demo API Integration. I can tag the test I can tag the load test task just like I could a regular test. So I'll call this one Demo. Duration is the total length of the test itself. So we'll go with 30 seconds for the sake of this demonstration. Ramp up is kind of a slower ramp up essentially of requests as the task gets underway before it gets to full scale. And then users per agent, because this is a demonstration deployment where you only have access to 10 users per agent, but how many resources you provision to your load testing agents on your side is completely up to the company in question. So in this case, I'm going to say 10 per agent, and I'll select both of the agents I have access to, which gives me a full 20 users. And then environments down here allows me to change environments. Just like in API Fortress testing, it'll replace any variables with the override variables assigned by that environment. So I'll click Check up in the upper right corner, and then Demonstration Task populates into this list here. And if I just click Play, it'll execute the load test. So now what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to wait about 35 seconds until this test actually completes. After the load test is complete, we'll see this charting of results here. So on the upper left side, we see successes versus failures over time. On the right side, we see a charting of fetch versus latency over time. And down at the bottom, we see a detailed view of how each individual endpoint that is hit in the scope of that test that was being leveraged for the load test did with regards to latency, fetch, overall, peak, and success versus failures. Now, from here, we can take this a step further, and we can jump into the actual report document itself. So in the report document, we can see a lot of the same data that we saw in that quick view in the previous screen, but here we actually have a lot more detail. So we can see our success versus total hits, average requests per minute, and the overall timing, so fetch and latency of each of those requests. Here we'll see a chart of, over the course of that minute roughly that the test ran, fetch and latency. We can see our response time peak over time. Down here, we can see our successes versus failures over time again. And in the case of this test, it should be mentioned that every test passed. So we didn't actually see any failures in the scope of the load test, which is why we're not seeing any red. And then down here, we have a broken out view of each of our individual endpoints and how they performed over time. We can see average peak latency, we can see average and peak fetch, average 90th percentile and peak overall, and then successes versus failures again. On the left side, we can see how many instances of each response status code we got from each of these endpoints. So in the case of this one, we had 512 200s. Down here in the card endpoint, we had 500 200s and 1,002 201s. And then down here, we can see our endpoint summary with our averages again. And then finally, at the bottom, we see events, which will just be a charting of our successes versus failures. So that's the process for leveraging API Fortress load testing in a nutshell. It's important to remember that the point of API Fortress load testing is not to knock a server off its feet with massive amounts of calls. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to send enough calls in a properly structured test to validate where in the scope of our end-to-end workflow are the programmatic bottlenecks. We're not looking to see how much more RAM an EC2 server can provide once it's put under load. We're looking to see where the actual failure points in our code live. So that's all for this video. If you guys have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, load testing is currently only available for our on-premises customers. And if you have any questions about an on-premises instance, please don't hesitate to reach out as well.